we won't just manage through this crisis. We will prosper from it. Now more than ever, we need to take control of our destiny. We're focusing on our government's mission to make housing more affordable for all Canadians. You know, young Canadians.
In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled one of the largest housing initiatives in Canada's history. The new program, Build Canada Homes, begins with $13 billion Canadian in federal funding and a clear mission to double the pace of home construction over the next decade. The announcement was more than a policy speech. It was framed as a national mobilization to tackle a housing crisis that has left young Canadians locked out of ownership and families struggling with rising rents. Build Canada Homes will channel federal money, land, and regulatory power into a single agency, designed to make large projects viable and to accelerate approvals. From 6 pilot sites in cities such as Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton to a rental protection fund and a $1 billion commitment to transitional housing, the plan seeks to scale up quickly. At the heart of it is a shift toward modular and factory-built homes, a model intended to cut construction time by half and lower costs by as much as 20%.
South of the border, the picture looks very different. President Donald Trump's second term has been defined by reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries, and softwood lumber from Canada remains under some of the heaviest scrutiny. The U.S. Department of Commerce completed its most recent review in August 2025, setting average countervailing duties near 14.63% and anti-dumping rates above 20% for many Canadian producers. American builders argue that these tariffs feed directly into higher material costs. The path is straightforward. A charge at the border raises the price for wholesalers, which in turn increases the bids builders must accept for framing packages. In a sector where margins are already tight and interest rates remain high, the extra expense can decide whether a project moves forward or stalls. Industry groups in the U.S. lumber sector dispute the size of the impact, claiming price swings in lumber markets are more important. Yet for builders operating on fixed contracts, even modest increases become critical. For American families, the outcome is visible in fewer affordable options. The National Association of Home Builders has repeatedly warned that tariffs worsen the affordability challenge by making it harder to deliver entry-level homes. Smaller contractors, often the backbone of local construction, find themselves squeezed between rising input costs and customers unwilling to accept higher bids. Projects are delayed, scaled back, or canceled altogether. The pressure is not limited to new construction. Renovation budgets stretch thinner, and homeowners looking to repair or remodel discover that lumber-based materials eat into savings faster than expected. The tariff wall remains in place because Washington sees it as leverage in broader trade talks. But for households trying to enter the market, the effect is a structural headwind. Rising costs in labor and finance already weigh heavily, and lumber duties make the road to homeownership even steeper. That is why the contrast with Canada's new approach stands out so sharply. Build Canada Homes is designed to de-risk projects by approving them in bulk, offering flexible financing, and opening federal lands for development. The program also includes a $1.5 billion rental protection fund to keep existing units affordable and targeted investments in supportive housing for vulnerable populations. By prioritizing Canadian steel, aluminum, and timber, the initiative aims to strengthen domestic supply chains rather than rely on imports. The early pipeline includes 4,000 factory-built homes, with capacity to expand toward 45,000 on the first sites alone. Execution risks are real, from fiscal strain to the challenge of scaling new construction methods. But the intent is unmistakable: to use federal power to make housing more accessible. In the United States, tariffs remain a source of rising costs. In Canada, public investment is being deployed to bring costs down. The two countries face the same crisis of affordability, yet their chosen responses reveal very different paths forward.
Setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world, and that's what they're going to pay if they want to do business in the United States.
What happens
happened to 90 trade deals in 90 days?
We've spoken to everybody. We know it's all done.
I think with Vietnam, the UK, with China, not all those are intended to be final deals either.
At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign forced allies into quick agreements before his deadline. The promise was stability, with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for huge investment pledges in the United States. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries still feel the strain. Washington's message is simple: invest big or face higher tariffs. That has left allies from Europe to Asia weighing short-term relief against the burden of massive commitments and the risk that Trump could change course again.
Japan's auto sector shows the limits of these deals. The World Trade Organization reported that the average U.S. tariff rate now exceeds 20%, the highest in more than a century. For Japanese car makers, this is a real cost.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
Mazda expects almost $1 billion in extra expenses this year. To cope, it is ramping up output at a $2 billion plant in Alabama, built during Trump's first term. That investment softens the blow, but half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan for the U.S. market. The company also relies heavily on a large factory in Mexico, which remains exposed until Washington finalizes terms with Mexico. The result is uncertainty, not stability. Europe's metal sector is in a similar bind.
Negotiations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the framework trade agreement with the US will provide support for Europe's metal sector freight, but details remain in short supply.
Brussels reached a framework agreement with Washington, promising tariff cuts and a quota system. Yet steel and aluminum still face a punishing 50% duty. The quota system, which should allow some duty-free exports, is not yet defined. The European Steel Association says U.S. tariffs have already damaged an industry worth more than $90 billion a year and weakened by falling demand. Business leaders warn they remain in the dark, with little more than promises to rely on. These examples show that rushing to sign has not removed the pressure.
Canada took another route. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside CUSMA as of August 1st. That sounds severe, but CUSMA continues to exempt the vast majority of Canadian trade. According to Scotiabank chief economist Jean-François Perrault, between 85 and 95% of exports remain tariff-free under the deal, when averaged, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6%. That is painful, but still lower than the 15% rate faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Although Canada has felt the pain of Trump's tariffs, the country is turning its focus inward. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, it is strengthening itself at home.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities.
This was clear in the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa, where leaders emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs, but the data suggests that Canada has avoided the most punishing outcomes while keeping leverage for future talks. Unlike partners that promised hundreds of billions in investments, Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief.
What the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and lingering uncertainty, Japan's car makers and Europe's steel industry show that the pain did not disappear after the agreements. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in specific industries, but kept the broader economy intact and its negotiating position alive. This is not surrender. It is a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. Trump may continue to escalate, but Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach shows that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands.
At some point, his view is maybe a tariff is better than a deal.
Michigan's governor has directly raised the alarm with President Donald Trump after the damage his tariffs will do to the auto sector in America's car capital.
In Michigan, the heart of America's auto industry, the pressure is building. Over the summer, President Donald Trump's latest tariff measures have landed with force, and the numbers tell a sobering story. General Motors reported its second quarter profits fell by $1 billion, attributing much of the decline to new import taxes. Stellantis said it lost $2.7 billion in the first half of 2025, also pointing to tariffs as a major factor. Ford's latest results are expected soon, but analysts already anticipate the same pattern. Trump has pitched these tariffs as a way to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Yet in Detroit and across Michigan, the early impact is hard to miss. Rising costs, squeezed margins, and a growing unease that these measures may be hitting home harder than they are hitting foreign competitors.
The new import taxes rolled out in the last several months could lead to more factory floor job losses, price hikes, and lower profits.
The problem starts with the basics of production. Since June 2025, imported steel and aluminum, critical for vehicle frames, chassis, and countless components, have carried a 50% tariff. Canada, the largest aluminum supplier to the United States, is now facing a 35% rate on non-USMCA goods as of August 1st. Mexico, though given a 90-day delay on new tariffs, still faces the threat of 50% duties on certain metals and auto parts if talks fail. Outside North America, India's rate has been raised to 50%, affecting some automotive parts and materials that U.S. manufacturers rely on. Even items far from the assembly line, leather, textiles, and interior trim imported from Asia, are caught in the net. The complexity of modern supply chains means that a car labeled "Made in America" can still depend on dozens of foreign-sourced elements. Many U.S.-based suppliers themselves import critical subcomponents, now taxed heavily before they ever reach a Michigan factory floor.
So far, auto companies have been eating the impacts of the tariffs, and that's what we're seeing in the latest profit reports. It's only a matter of time until the companies pass those costs off onto the customer.
At first, the Big Three absorbed these new costs, hoping to protect sales. But, according to the Center for Automotive Research, the 25% tariffs on autos and parts alone could add $108 billion to industry costs in 2025. That figure doesn't even account for the knock-on effects from 50% steel and aluminum duties, or the layered tariffs from multiple trading partners. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation warns that these costs will inevitably reach consumers. Higher sticker prices could push entry-level models off the market entirely, reducing choice and slowing the rollout of new technologies. Electric vehicle makers face an extra hurdle. The U.S. still lacks a large-scale domestic battery manufacturer, forcing reliance on imports that now carry steep tariffs. In Detroit, cutting production means more than fewer cars on the lot. It means fewer jobs, especially in communities that have spent decades rebuilding after past downturns. Analysts say the next 3 years could bring sustained declines in sales and employment if current policies stay in place. Trump sees tariffs as leverage to pressure trading partners into investing in the U.S. and opening their markets. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, however, has stayed firm, keeping most Canadian exports tariff-free under USMCA and seeking new trade routes abroad. He maintains that the steep duties on Canadian metals and parts ultimately raise costs for U.S. consumers and manufacturers more than for Canada. It's a test of two strategies: Trump's high-pressure push for quick concessions versus Carney's long-term approach built on stability and alliances. For America's auto sector, the outcome will shape whether these policies deliver stronger domestic production or deepen the cost and job losses already taking hold in Michigan and beyond.
I'm praying that everything's going to go fine. But if it doesn't, I'm going to ask the people, do you trust President Trump? I don't.
When the 35% tariff hit Canadian goods outside the USMCA, it wasn't tied to a breakdown in trade talks. There was no last-minute provocation, no missed agreement. The deadline set by President Trump simply passed, and the penalty was enforced. From softwood lumber to steel, the pain hit fast and deep. But the bigger problem wasn't just the tariffs themselves. It was the instability they represented. In recent weeks, the U.S. president raised tariffs on dozens of countries, though in several notable cases, the tariffs were imposed for reasons that went far beyond trade. India was targeted for buying Russian oil, while Canada was placed in the same political category as China, a country that refused to bend the knee to the U.S. and dared to hit back. And that's what turned this into more than a trade dispute. It became a question of how Canada should respond to a neighbor whose rules change without notice and whose goals shift by the day.
Carney has two big meetings today, cabinet and with the premiers. What is he saying to both groups?
I think he's giving them an update and telling them the state of play. I mean, the prime minister has been very good at keeping, his own government informed on stuff. He needs to have that political support around him as he'll hear the views and take the temperature on that.
Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't wait. Within days, he convened a virtual summit with provincial premiers and cabinet members. The goal wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. The meeting came after Trump's deadline had passed. Carney updated leaders on the stalled U.S. talks while gauging support across a divided political landscape. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called for a tariff-for-tariff response. Others, like Alberta's Danielle Smith, showed more caution. But Carney chose not to engage directly with Trump at this stage. That silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. The message was clear. Canada would not be baited into an emotional reaction. Not yet. Earlier in the year, Canada responded forcefully. It imposed retaliatory tariffs and unveiled billion-dollar support packages, like the $1.2 billion Canadian dollar plan for the softwood lumber sector announced in early August. Steel producers received similar backing in July. But now, the tone is shifting. Carney's top ministers, including Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, are signaling a move toward flexibility. Speaking from Mexico City, where they met with President Claudia Sheinbaum, Champagne emphasized that Canada would reassess its trade response if it served the national interest. That doesn't mean Canada is backing down. It means Canada is choosing its moments. After all, 85% of Canadian exports to the U.S. remain tariff-free under USMCA. The government is playing a long game, protecting vital sectors while keeping the door open for meaningful talks.
I think we're going to see some real progress today, though, Faiza, on that list of those nation-building projects. He really wants to get going on those quickly. He says the federal government is going to be up to speed to start approving those within 2 years, starting in September, when that office is.
Carney has refused to commit to any artificial deadlines. While Trump accelerates pressure with time-bound ultimatums, Carney is working through long-term plans, boosting domestic infrastructure, building a market for Canadian lumber within Canada, and expanding ties with Mexico. The Canadian government is launching a new federal office by early September to fast-track major nation-building projects, railways, power lines, and port expansions. These are not press releases. They are structural shifts meant to reduce reliance on U.S. access and create resilience, especially if future shocks occur. At the same time, coordination with Mexico is becoming more strategic. Both countries were blindsided by Trump's moves. Now they're finding shared cause: energy security, critical minerals, and joint resilience.
Looking at the Amcan Fortress, put a ring around America and the U.S., in Canada, have the two strongest nations in the world. We could thrive and prosper. He'd rather fight. I don't want to fight. I want to fight with our closest allies and friends.
Trump's trade strategy is unpredictable, volatile, and even. But that unpredictability may be Canada's greatest reason not to rush into a bad deal. Carney's approach isn't static, it's calibrated. Yes, some retaliatory tariffs may be rolled back. Yes, some sectors may be shielded more than others. But none of it signals surrender. It signals discipline. In a negotiation with no rules, Canada is choosing strategy over spectacle. The goal isn't to win headlines, it's to preserve long-term economic security. And in this kind of trade war, that might be the smartest move of all.
Some of the countries have so many countries you can't negotiate deals with everyone, so we'll have a straight, simple tariff of anywhere between 15 and 50%.
We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs.
For months, Canada and the United States have been locked in a cycle of tariffs and counter-tariffs. President Donald Trump leaned on the emergency powers of the IEEPA to impose sweeping duties on allies and rivals alike. Canada answered with its own retaliatory tariffs, a shield to protect its industries and workers. But now, Prime Minister Mark Carney has made a decisive move.
I'm announcing today that the Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
Beginning September 1st, Canada will remove many of its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods that are CUSMA compliant. To some, it looks like a concession. In reality, it is a reset, a calculated gesture to restart serious negotiations with Washington. And importantly, Canada is not surrendering leverage. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos remain firmly in place.
The first level of this two-table strategy is direct engagement with the United States. Over the past 8 months, Canadian exports to the U.S. have fallen from roughly 73 to 74% of total exports down to around 67 to 68%, according to Chambers of Commerce data from Manitoba. Businesses delayed investments, uncertain of what the next week or month might bring. Yet Carney's adjustment is already reshaping the conversation. Today, over 85% of Canada-US trade flows tariff-free under CUSMA. And according to the Canadian government, the actual average tariff rate on Canadian goods entering the U.S. now stands at about 5.6%, far below the global average of 16% facing other countries. That means Canada has preserved the most favorable access to the American market of any U.S. trading partner. By lifting many of its countermeasures while holding on to strategic sectors, Canada is showing flexibility without abandoning strength.
Canada currently has the best trade deal with the United States. The actual U.S. tariff rate on Canadian goods is 5.6%. Compare that to the 16% global average. That remains the lowest amongst all of the United States trading partners.
But Carney's plan does not stop at Washington. The second table is Europe. While talks continue with Trump, Canada is moving to strengthen economic ties across the Atlantic. In Poland, Carney emphasized new cooperation in energy and trade. And his next stop is Germany for meetings with Chancellor Friedrich Merz and leading business executives. The goal is clear: diversify Canada's export markets and reduce reliance on the U.S. This pivot comes at a crucial moment. On August 12th, China imposed provisional anti-dumping duties of 75.8% on Canadian canola seed imports, effectively shutting down a trade worth billions of dollars. With canola oil and meal already facing 100% tariffs since March, the Chinese market is now almost completely closed to Canadian producers. That shock underscores why Carney is turning toward Europe. By opening new markets and expanding partnerships abroad, Canada is building a safety net for its farmers and exporters, and ensuring that trade pressures from the U.S. or China cannot hold the country hostage.
So who holds the advantage in this moment? Trump can impose tariffs with the stroke of a pen, but Carney is showing how to blunt the impact. By reopening the door to talks with Washington, protecting strategic industries, and at the same time expanding into Europe, Canada is playing two tables at once. Canadian families stand to benefit quickly. The removal of retaliatory tariffs will lower the cost of food, beverages, household goods, and building materials after September 1st. Analysts note that in April and May alone, Ottawa collected $2.5 billion Canadian dollars in retaliatory duties, much of which was passed on to consumers. That burden is now easing. At the same time, Canada still holds its strongest card: unrivaled access to the U.S. market under CUSMA, with most goods entering tariff-free. Trump may seek to dominate the trade narrative, but Carney has shifted the ground. Canada is no longer only reacting. It is steering a dual strategy, one that reduces dependence, secures new allies, and protects its own economy. In this two-level game, Canada is not retreating. It is advancing, proving that smart choices can turn pressure into power.